Hello everybody, Drew here again. Today I'm going to pick back up with the same beat and I'm going to show you how to create some effect sounds that are pretty common in hip hop and will ultimately give this a lot more of like a finished product feel. The first one of those sounds that comes to mind is going to be a trap snare roll. So let's go ahead and listen to the beat, and I just know ahead of time that these sort of rolls happen at transitionary points of the beat. We'll also look at adding the sort of trap snare sound, the secondary snare, to the actual beat, but we'll do that next. So let's take a listen. Alright, gonna go ahead and stop it there. So I think the place that I'm gonna start by showing you how to write a fill is going to be into this hook. The first time we hear the actual melody that we wrote in the last session. So in order to do this, I'm gonna need to create some space in the drums. You could imagine, again, we're sort of always referencing what a real drummer would do, because the first time drums were recorded and a lot of the recordings you hear are played by human beings, and human beings have limitations, mainly only a certain number of limbs. So if a drummer is going to go to a snare roll, which again, this is a drum machine, but we're going to want to create space for that. So we're going to do that by basically getting rid of everything after a certain beat. I'm going to get rid of the snare also, and the 808. So now we have this. All right, cool. So let's talk about how we make these trap snare rolls, if you will. And by trap snare roll, what I'm referring to is the pitched up or pitched down snares that are usually some sort of roll or fast notes. All right, so to do this, I'm going to use Logic's built-in sampler, the ESX24. So I can go here and create a new track. I'm going to choose the EXS24. I always get the letters mixed up. I'm going to choose a stereo signal. Alright, so once we're into this window, I'm going to click Edit. Now, an important note to this, if you didn't watch my Logic tutorials in the beginning, you're going to have to go into Logic, Preferences, Advanced Tools, and you're going to have to click Enable All. That's what's going to allow you to create these instruments or access more potential functions in Logic, and I have those all enabled, so in order to do everything I'm doing in the video, make sure you do as well. Alright, so I'm going to click Edit here, and I'm going to take what is our snare that we're using from the song and drag it in. Now you'll notice some stuff comes up here already. The most important thing to note is this pitch C3. Now we can edit this, and I could say call the pitch C1. What that does is when we open the actual MIDI window, so let me create a MIDI window on that track, C1 is going to be where the actual original sample sits. Now, basically what by default what the player is going to do is I've already set up a snare drum rack where we now have that original sample pitched up and down. Alright, so now we can write a pattern in MIDI using these notes. Alright, so probably want to start somewhere around this G, G2, all the way down to our root potentially. Alright, now when I get out of this window, it's going to ask me if I want to save. I'll save the instrument, call it something you want. I'm going to call this demo video snare. Alright, now all those presets that you save are going to be accessible in this drop-down menu. In this window, we have a lot of controls that will look similar to a synthesizer control. So we can really start to play around and manipulate the actual samples. For this kind of video or this kind of situation, I'm literally going to just drag in the snare and then re-pitch it and do a roll via MIDI. And that would be the most common thing I do for this. Alright, so let's hear it. Alright. So now I can do some sort of pattern. We could do steady 16th notes. We could do 2 together and then 1 at a time and skip a little bit. Alright, that'll definitely work. You get the idea. We can create a lot more sophisticated patterns as well. So I could do a speed up sort of sound where I make these instead of 16th notes, 32nd notes. Option drag there. I could even go one step further. These sort of hits, we're going to want to make sure we make them as long as possible because the default of this sampler is going to be to only play the note while we're holding down. So if I shorten that up even more, it is playing. Sometimes the MIDI won't even trigger a note if we have it as thin as possible. So this is what we have now. Cool. Now I encourage you to make all sorts of cool patterns. You really can't go wrong. Speeding up into the beat always sounds pretty cool. So does jumping around or not having as many beats. Just literally deleting. You can do a lot of cool things. And I think it's pretty fun to do these sessions where you make a lot of different ones. One thing I've done in the past, which can be handy, is to spend a session where you're making drum fills, and then you can export them as audio. Make sure you notate the BPM you're at. So for this session, it'd be 140. And then you can save them in a sample file. And if you're trying to produce a beat and perhaps you want to move a little bit quicker, you could basically throw in or audition the samples that you've made in a previous session instantly. And if you make a lot of them, you'll have a lot of choices to go through, and using a similar sort of snare instrument sound when you are doing fills between beats starts to go a long way into making what is like your sound as a producer. One of the things about the computer is we can really create any instrument that we want, or download a VST that plays an instrument that exists or doesn't exist. And we can constantly grab these great instruments and use new stuff when we write. But we want to be conscious to the fact that we, as electronic producers, are sort of electronic ensembles or electronic bands. We're multiple sound creating entities that are working together to play a song, make something musical. So if you were to listen to a Led Zeppelin record and imagine for a second that instead of having guitar, bass, drums, and Robert Plant singing, they all of a sudden would have a completely different group of instruments playing, like perhaps an orchestra or some violins, and those instruments sound great, tastefully added. But a lot of what like the sound of a band is the sound of the instrumentation. So as you go along producing, just be conscious of the fact that your instrumentation if it's not consistent or somewhat consistent in idea between one song and another, your tracks are going to sound like they came from different artists. Now in the future, I'm going to talk a lot about writing for specific purposes that other than your own releases. So writing for specific artists or writing for a specific licensing opportunity, be it television show or a movie or a commercial. A lot of times in any of those worlds, the instruments we choose are equally important to the rhythms they're playing to ultimately convey a message. And again, instruments come with the history of their other recordings. So anytime you use an instrument that somebody's going to recognize, like a guitar or a piano, you're going to evoke certain feelings based on the way that instrument's used in the greater music language. All right, so now that I added a fill in the break and I created some of the other ones, I'm going to go along and put these in between sections. Then I'll go ahead and edit them some more. So I'm just going to use a different one each time, going from our hook back into the verse and the verse into the hook. Now, I have to do the same thing and clear up some of these drums. So I'm probably going to want to get rid of my hi-hats, my 808. Now, because we're going to it from a section in the song that is big, there's a lot going on, it's the hook, it should be the biggest, and we're going to a smaller section, we probably don't want the snare drum to speed up. Perhaps we want to do the opposite. For the same reason, we want to create an opposite effect where we're bringing the listener down. So we could basically do something like this. Let's make it a little more interesting. It works. I'm not sure if it's my favorite thing I've ever written, but you get the idea. I think that drum fills are some of the most fun things to write as a producer, because once you've written the beat and the melody and the chords and everything else is feeling good, drum fills mainly just add something new, something different, something exciting. You can't really go wrong with what you have. Ultimately, you'll find stuff that works the best for you. Maybe you like the sound that people have done before, which is the fast trill dropping in pitch. But maybe that's not your thing, and whatever is your thing is totally fine. It would be kind of a boring world if we all did the same exact stuff. So we could even do this. Alright, so for something like that, to again make it bring down the energy. Cool. I think that works pretty well. I like that a lot more. Whoops, got out of piano roll. Cool. So now we have some things breaking it up. Now I want to talk a little bit about adding a secondary snare to a beat. So let's talk about in this verse. Now, a secondary snare, a lot of hip-hop beats you'll hear, especially current ones, will have a snare or a clap that's up front, usually has a lot of reverb, usually is one of the biggest things in the mix. And then these additional snares, as I like to call them, or secondary snares, are doing trills and filling in the beat, and a lot of times they're under a filter themselves, the whole thing. Alright, so to do this, I'm going to duplicate my snare channel, and then I'm just going to go ahead, gotta click my inspector, and put a low pass filter on it. I'm going to do this, so one, it's going to make this snare sound a lot different than my other one. I'm also going to take off my reverb or maybe most of it. So the snare is going to sound different, and it's not going to pop as much through the mix, and that's kind of like what we're going for. One of my drives is making some weird sounds over there. Sorry if you can hear that. Alright, so I'm going to take the original sample, since I'm filtering and going to treat the sound differently. It should not be a problem that it's the same sample. You can always use different ones for this kind of thing as well. So you might have heard stuff like this. Wrong channel. Cool. Apologize if that's not a sound that you associate with the genre, but for me it is. A lot of songs from that sort of world of music that people have showed me in the last 2 years definitely have that sort of sound. Yeah. Thank you. Rap music. All right. I think it's kind of cool adding these other accents. It basically functions to highlight certain rhythms in this style of music, which is very rhythmically dependent. If we're writing this for a rapper, in which case they're going to be playing with the rhythm, with the way that they say their words and attack the beat. I've always looked at these other accents as additional things that, should they choose to accent words, where we as producers are sort of outlining and highlighting the rhythms from the beat that we feel should be incorporated into whatever it is they're doing. Alright, let's hear this stuff. Perhaps the first half of it we only use a couple of them and then we keep it going. So yeah, this is something that if we wanted to add this to each drum groove, we could add a variation of it. Or what I'm thinking would be cool is to make sure that the beat continues to build throughout the song. Perhaps the second verse, because we bring in the snare, we're already decreasing the energy. And we're decreasing the energy by going back to just the reversed synth patch and none of this other stuff. Well, the snare could work to sort of add excitement and something new, even though we're taking things away. I think that's a decent idea. Cool. Now what I'm going to talk about, in effect, is delay. I'm going to talk about doing automated delays to basically add a sonic glue of sorts between sections. This works really well anytime we're going from a big section to a small section. This works in a wide variety of popular genres, not just hip-hop. So let me show you how I would do this. First of all, I identify what do I want to make echo. You can actually hear the trail for the delay that's already on the space mandolin, which came with that patch in Logic, is delaying over. So we're going to do something really similar. Since the koto doesn't have any delay on it, let's try this one. Alright. So there's a few ways I like to do this. So I could create a delay that I put on the bus that I then automate how much I'm sending the audio to. That can be a great way of going about it. The benefit to that is that you can send multiple different things through the same delay, and you could perhaps change the sound if, the next time we do this by how much you're sending through the delay. And the other way that I do this is I'll just put a delay on the koto channel, and then I'll bounce in place the last couple MIDI hits, and then I'll mix that audio in. But to highlight the buses, I'll show you how to do this with the send. Alright, so right beneath bus 2, this is an empty send channel. Now I'm going to create a new bus, and when you're working with multiple buses or tracks, it's a great idea to name them. So I'm just going to call this our delay bus, even though I don't have a delay on there yet. Alright, so in here I'm going to go in and grab Logic's stereo delay. The benefit to a stereo delay is, like it sounds, stereo, the idea of two signals, left and right. We can do things like a ping pong delay where we make the sound when it echoes back to us bounce between pan sides in our speakers, which can be kind of a cool effect. So when we do this, right now the delay also set up so that we have different notes echoing. So the way I like to do this is I'll first send. So I'll first do the automation on the bus, and then we'll be able to edit the actual delay parameters to hear our options. Alright, so to do this, I'm going to have to go here to touch. Now what touch does is it's going to start recording anything I do. Another way I can create automation is by hitting A, like we did for volume and the automated phase or filtering we did in the last video. Now, certain things are difficult to figure out how to actually automate them. All right, so we can automate our send, which is by going into the actual parameters of, I guess, the main controls. But what I like to do with stuff like this is just to use the feature of touch. So I can put touch on. I'm going to hit play. I'm going to move it the way I envision it being moved, and you're going to notice that the automation line is created. Here we go. Cool. I don't know if you heard that. Let's solo our two channels. Alright, you can hear it echo there. Now we can start to play with the actual kind of delay. So feedback is how much of the delayed signal that's going to come back into the delay. You can think of it as like the more feedback you have, the longer the delay happens. Now one important thing to note with delays, especially if you want to take care of your hearing and avoid unwanted feedback sounds, if you put the feedback really high, what's happening is so much of the delayed signal is feeding back into the delay loop that as that signal gets softer in volume, there's a lack of signal being fed into itself. The result of this is feedback, and what you'll notice if you run into this problem is you'll hear a hissing or a humming sound, and that the guilty party in that issue is our feedback. But we do want some feedback because that's going to dictate the volume of our actual delay. Up here, this is the cut. So if we wanted to, say, put a high-pass filter on our delay, in other words, the echo we hear back will sound very thin, we could do this. Notice that's very high versus a low pass filter. So it's also kind of cool. We can also automate those things. It's another example where I would use touch and not read. Or touch rather than finding the parameter in automation. Alright, so the line was actually created here, and I could edit this, create more delay, or more signal being sent to the delay, or less. Alright, let's talk about this stuff over here. Now, our delay is set up right now to be a rhythmically corresponding delay. We could also set up our delay in terms of time. The advantage to this kind of delay is that we can use rhythms that are already in the song and thus are to the grid. That means the delay is going to be in time, if you will. If we wanted to use a delay that was out of time, we could go to our millisecond. And if we chose, say, 200 milliseconds, that's going to be close to an eighth note, but not quite an eighth note. So we're going to get some interesting polyrhythms as that goes out of time, as it continues to echo. Alright, so for this, I think I actually want to do a slower. Let's do a dotted quarter note. Now what that is that's the syncopated note I'd said I liked earlier. A note hitting on the 1, the 4th 16th, and the following upbeat 8th note. Let's hear what this sounds like. More feedback. Cool. Let's go to let's hear that in context. Cool. Pretty trippy. I think we should cut off probably below like 200. Sounded just kind of punchy. That's pretty cool. Try ping pong. That's cool. Turn down our feedback. Nice. I think that little bit of trail or echoing of what was before does go a long way to help us to tie these sections together. This kind of thing is really cool at the end of a song, so you kind of have just a trailing echo of everything that was once there before. But you get the idea on how we would do that. Now, again, I could send something else through the delay. So let's talk about if I send our arpeggio through the same delay. I think that would be cool. Again, I'm going to use touch. It's going to record what I do on that channel. Cool. Let's hear that. Pretty cool. It's kind of nice sending multiple sounds that are already moving through a delay. We get a lot of like really interesting rhythmic textures that happen. You could overdo this. My rule of thumb with reverbs and delays is typically less is more. Because again, we want the listener to feel the benefit of these without noticing them happening. We don't want to distract from our other information or our other instruments. Alright, cool. I think we covered some great effects to add throughout this. I may return to this to cover perhaps recording a vocalist on this, or other things as they come up. I thought it would be cool to design an 808 for this track. I am planning on doing some Serum sound design stuff in addition to these Logic videos. But all in good time. Again, my email is found below. It's drusound@gmail.com. Feel free to reach out to me. Let me know if this helped you out. If you're working on beats that this inspired you to make, or I'd love to check them out. And again, happy producing. Talk to you guys later.